Hey class, welcome back. Apologies for the lateness of this video. I have been feeling under the weather this week and have been scrambling to get ready to leave this Friday. A couple quick updates. Next week's going to mostly be a work week. I'm hoping to get everything settled today and tomorrow so we can just launch Monday. I think I wrote somewhere on the weekly assignment that we'd be doing a pre-writing assignment for this essay. I haven't got to it, so I'm just going to give you all next week to work on it. So there's not going to be a quiz next week, but there will be some materials. You are going to kind of need to revisit a lot of ceremony. I'm going to give you like a structured way to go through a novel again and look for patterns without necessarily like rereading every single word. And it'll all be focused on the major essay for this semester. And then we're going to have about 2 weeks after that to work on revisions and put together our portfolio that we'll be submitting the final week. So we're wrapping things up very rapidly. I mentioned elsewhere that for the second half of this class, I need to revise my late policy. I have shortened the 2-week window to a 1-week window, and honestly, I think maybe I should have been doing that from the get-go, especially in a summer course. I love the idea of giving you guys a lot of extra time, but a lot of you seem to be taking advantage of that, and I think that's going to be to your detriment. Moving on. So I'm going to dive into some essay feedback. There was a good number of people who didn't turn this in, so I kind of am working with a limited set. So no one failed the essay that turned that in, which is good. And overall, I was very pleased with them. The essays that did best demonstrated a really good understanding of their audience, i.e. their character from the text. By referencing events in the text, I was really impressed with students who were doing this because it showed me careful reading skills and an earnest desire to connect with a character. Some of them, it really felt like you were taking it seriously and were actually envisioning this character as a real person. And then they drew clear analogs between their personal experiences and that audience. And they also had a lot of sentence level control. I noticed that, perhaps unsurprisingly, the people who did very good on this portion also had very good sentence level control. That's probably because they read and write a lot, and they like to do so. Conversely, essays that struggled, there were some that never really engaged their imagined audience, if they mentioned them at all, which was a really important part of this assignment. Audience is huge, right? And then they also struggled on the paragraph sentence level. So I wasn't going to teach any grammar in this class, especially being the condensed class. Usually students complain a lot when I give them grammar work, which I get. So I wasn't going to do that, but I saw a need for it. So I worked with Septim to put together Septim's grammar grimoire, which I think is a cool idea. It's kind of something I've been playing around with doing so far. It is a very bare bones, I guess you would call it a beta version. So that is down here. I haven't gotten around to making any images for it, streamlining it. I think eventually I'd like to flesh it out fully, but I'd really love some feedback on it. Would exercises be useful? Would you actually do exercises even if they weren't graded? Because I don't really want to create a whole separate optional quiz track for people, though I do want people to use these if they need them. So I built this out of all of the comments I was giving people on their assignments. So this one is on the sentence level, a recap of sentence level foundations. There are some problems with conjunctions, etc. So go through these if you had problems or comments on your grammar, or even if you didn't. And I would really love some feedback on whether or not you find this stuff useful. I don't know how much that'll help this actual class, but it can give me a good idea of whether or not I need to create more content like this in the future. Because I used to teach out of a grammar book, and then students would complain about it, and they're like, why are we doing this? If I actually made my own, that might work a little better. So yeah, Septim's Grammar Grimoire, use it if you need it. Okay, here I wanted to talk about a quick comment over the writing ritual that I really liked. I found the calling quote from Ceremony that in my mind refuses to stay quiet. Cattle are like living things. If you separate them for the land too long, keep them in barns and corrals, they lose something. Their stomachs get to where they can only eat rolled oats and dry alfalfa. When you turn them loose again, they go running all over. They are scared because the land is unfamiliar and they are lost. They don't stop being scared either. Even when they look quiet, they quit running. Scared animals die off easily. I picked this quote because when Tayo says it, I believe he is speaking of himself, even though he is simply speaking of cows. That's a really good observation. This is an excellent moment to gain insight into a character, to build like a deep connection, because I'm sure a lot of students maybe read over this quote and didn't think too much about it. But I do think Teo is not only speaking of himself, but of his people and kind of people in general. All of us are kind of estranged from the land now. I think this quote really embodies what he's going through in his life, and Tayo knows it. I'm also drawn to this because it's not just true to the story, it's an idea that applies to life as a whole, right? It really stood out to me when I first read it, and it may not be the most important or altering quote that I could have chosen, but I think it's a symbol of Tayo's mental state. I would push back. I think this is a really important quote, and a quote that clearly is altering for you, right? Because this gave you insight into Tayo's mind. You drew a bunch of really interesting personal connections to it. You probably relate to it, I'm guessing, because usually we find resonance with things that we're thinking about to a certain degree. So this is the exact kind of thing I'm talking about when I'm saying look for quotes, look for patterns, look for resonances that matter to you and make meaning out of them. Because maybe everyone else in the class just skimmed over this quote, but you were able to, find a really interesting personal meaning, to gain insight into Tayo's character, and, make meaning with something that on the surface level is just about cows. That's really cool to see, and I really love to see that. Next, I'm just going to hop into some quizzes. So on those quizzes, I gave you 2 sample summaries. They were both AI generated. One, I prompted not Septum, I just used ChatGPT General to write like a summary. That was the one you actually ended up liking most, and then I had Septum write one that was the kind of annoying one. So I want to hop over here. So I uploaded all those summaries. I gave Septum a prompt. I had you generate 2 different summaries of Ceremony. One was good and one was bad. I had my students evaluate them. Attached, you'll find my student responses to each. Could you analyze them and help me uncover patterns, especially those that might not be easy to spot? So on the top level, students overwhelmingly associate tone with competence. This is a really good sign because it shows you're picking up on tone. They repeatedly mark the bad summary as casual, slangy, lazy, while the good summary is praised for being professional, confident, and structured. So that's a good sign that you guys are picking up on the nuances of the tone, even at the sentence or singular word level, right? They're learning to distinguish authorial ethos, which is good, right? Because you can think about how those word choices affected you as a reader, and you can make decisions about your own word choice based on that. This is key for synthesis and rhetorical awareness. Even if they can't name the rhetorical strategies, they're beginning to feel them. One student even commented on the shift in voice strength between the two. The hidden signal. Many students seem surprised by their own sensitivity to tone. This means you're reaching them. Oh, good. They're starting to internalize genre expectation without needing to be told explicitly. That is good. And I mean, that's you doing the work. That's not me. Well, I guess I'm doing something here. In theory. Secondary pattern, surface errors as ethical lapses. I think this is a carryover in part from the trauma of being in English classes and being grilled for your grammar. You'll notice even when I comment on your grammar, I don't attach morality to it, right? My own writing has grammatical issues from time to time. It's not like a moral problem, but I think it's interesting. Misspelling Tayo as Taro is mentioned by at least 5 students, not just as a factual mistake, but as a symbolic failure of respect or engagement. I immediately think the writer didn't pay attention or cared. Shows a lack of care when reading the story or when looking over the summary. Your students are intuiting that accuracy equals care equals credibility. I do think that's true. Whether or not I assign morality to those things, your credibility as an author is entirely dependent on how you present, factual evidence, right? So a comma here or there might not really affect how I read. If you're calling the main character the wrong name, or one of my favorite examples of this is when I teach this book Annihilation, and students, there's a movie version and there's a film version. And the movie version is not that, it's like roughly similar. It's, I'd say 80% similar, but there's some like really big differences. And in the movie version, okay, without giving too much away, so this book takes place in a spot called Area X, and there is like a sphere where you enter it, right? That you can't see otherwise. Only in the movie is that called the Shimmer, but students who haven't read it and like to rely on AI to do their homework for them always talk about the Shimmer in their paper on Annihilation, and that's always a dead giveaway to me that they didn't read the book. Higher order pattern, desire for subtextual engagement. Students repeatedly critique the weak summary for being too literal, summarizing plot without grasping underlying themes. It never goes in depth, skims the surface, misses the whole point of what makes Ceremony such an interesting and powerful book. In contrast, they praise the strong summary for weaving theme and interpretation into the plot recap. That's good that you're picking up on that, because we've been really focusing on summaries as a particular kind of retelling with the purpose of talking about whatever you need to talk about. Pedagogical insights. You're craving synthesis, which is great because we are going to be writing a synthesis essay soon. Skepticism towards simplicity. Even when the summary is technically accurate, students show discomfort when sentences are too simple, basic, or childish. This is not snobbery. It is a sign that your students want prose that matches the complexity of the source. I'd also say this is another thing I notice when people turn in AI-generated writing, but in the opposite way. Usually when a student turns in a piece of writing, their grammatical control matches the complexity of their ideas, right? Now I get writing that has high-level grammatical control and looks really polished, but doesn't have the idea to back it up. So it's interesting to see this coming through. Effective pattern, emotionally charged responses. Some students, especially on the bad summary, became viscerally upset. So this actually made me very upset. This is why I think Silko writes this book so well. This is known throughout the history of literature. That's awesome to me to see that you guys like actually care about this book, because it is a really good book and it is a really important book. And I get where you're coming from on that. Okay, so that was the summary of that, and that was all kind of interesting stuff for me to read through. Septim likes you. I like you. You're all are doing great. Well, those of you who are still, actually in the class. Okay, we're chugging along today. So now I'm going to talk about our quiz questions, and then I am going to hop off. With our revisions we have written will be a group effort or some sort of self-revision. We're going to be doing both, I think, over the last 2 weeks. So I love peer reviews. They're really hard to do digitally, especially when students are so spotty. I feel like people often end up, someone always gets the short end of the stick if I do things randomly. So maybe I'll assign people, but the last 2 weeks are going to be like kind of geared towards revision strategy. So I will have some sort of peer review for us to do. I do think they are better like in person, so I'm thinking on like a way to do it that's like I feel like is effective. How can authors use tone in nonfiction writing? It seems like most nonfiction writing is similar in its tone, but in fiction authors can have so much variety in how they write. Is it worthwhile to change and experiment with tone if you're writing about true events or research you've done? I just don't see very much variety in nonfiction. This is a really great question. So it depends what nonfiction you're talking about. If you're reading a textbook, if you're reading a newspaper, there was a time where those things were theoretically objective and written in such a way that they don't have the author's voice, because they're not supposed to be like about an author's thoughts. They're supposed to be a representation of objective reality. Newspapers, textbooks these days often do have some sort of bias or slant, but that might be what you're picking up on. However, there are lots of forms of nonfiction, and I would say the most successful nonfiction is creative nonfiction that will have a lot of character and tone. So think back on that Braiding Sweetgrass essay. That was nonfiction, and that has tons of voice. Think back on Le Guin's essay, Why Are Americans Afraid of Dragons? That's nonfiction, has tons of voice, tons of interesting ideas. and really your nonfiction writing. That's why we're developing voice and tone. So I would parse out what nonfiction you're talking about, because nonfiction is a very wide genre. I mean, philosophy is nonfiction, and there are clear differences between the way Aristotle writes and someone like contemporary like Slavoj Žižek. Very different types of writing, right? And well, I won't go into a philosophy wormhole, but Slavoj Žižek, he's a weirdo modern philosopher, has some good ideas, some bad ideas. I would say the reason he is such, again, let's say popular, but you guys don't know who he is, most likely. The reason he's such a prominent figure is because he is a very good writing, because he has a really engaging tone. He has a really creative approach to philosophy. So, yes, I would say it is absolutely worthwhile to change and experiment with tone if you're writing about true events or research you've done. That's really what sets exceptional writing apart from mediocre writing. Can any piece of writing have the ability to heal? What makes one capable of doing so? I would say it's your relationship to the writing that matters. I would say the act of writing has more of a holistic quality to it, in that when you take the practice of writing very seriously, especially creative writing, it is very therapeutic because it gives you a safe, imagined space to work through things and to uncover things you haven't really faced yet, right? So in my writing practice, I practice something called automatic writing, which comes out of the school of surrealism, which is basically you try to shut off the conscious brain and just like write weird stuff and see what comes out. If you do that over time, you'll start to unpack things you haven't really wrestled with. All sorts of weird things will come up for you to deal with and kind of come from the unconscious into the conscious. So I think, yes, any piece of writing, I mean, maybe not your average newspaper article, it's any piece of good creative writing, any good poem, but anything you connect to can help you heal certain things, certain traumas. I'm not saying don't go to your therapist. I'm not saying any of that. But I am saying, when we read something like Ceremony and read through all of the things that Tayo's going through, maybe we can't relate to every particular aspect of that. I'm not a veteran. I'm not a native person, but I know what it's like to feel estranged and to struggle with identity and struggle with who I am and like need to go back. I think I don't have like a historical culture. Like my family, we're from like England and Canada. So like most of my direct lineage is related really to like Wisconsin, which just has its culture, but like my family is kind of like new and like we don't have old traditions that came from the old world with us, right? So it's like I don't have some of the things Tayo has to go back to, but my experience of like kind of feeling like lost and how I make meaning in this world is really similar. So I can relate to Tayo in that way. So that was kind of a ramble. My question of the week is, what is a good way to stay on top of the weekly reading? Break it down into daily sections, right? I would really recommend reading every day, right? It is a lot easier to read. Let's see, do I have a calculator here? Because I'm bad at math. Clear. 100 divided by 7. Okay, it's probably easier to read 14 pages a day than, 100 pages in a single day, right? So break it up, and when you do that, if you set yourself like a bare minimum, like I'm going to read 10 pages a day, you're probably going to end up reading more than that because you'll get interested in the book. Something I've been doing also is like, I hate doing cardio. I've started to read while I do cardio, and my reading, it increases, right? Because you can just read a few pages at a time. Read when you have a break. Read when you have a few minutes. Don't idealize this reading time. And I know that's maybe contradictory to, what's your reading ritual? And, everyone has one. But also redefine what that is and when that can be, right? If you can get 10 pages of reading in on a break and you can do that every day, you're going to be sitting much better, right? That would be my recommendation, is to make it a daily habit. My question of the week, is there such thing as too long of a summary? Absolutely, right? So I think in my response to the student, I said summaries need to have, they're kind of in a Goldilocks spot, right? If I just said ceremony is a story about a native dude, you clearly would all be upset, right? Because that's not what it's about. But if I gave you a play-by-play, a ceremony is a summary of a native man. He starts off in an insane asylum, then he goes to a train tracks, then he goes to his auntie's, and then maybe we go back in time, and then he stabs a dude, and then he goes to a doctor, and then he goes to like a witch doctor. You'd be like, okay, what's going on, right? So you're looking for the sweet spot of, what is important to your argument, right? Another way to think about it is like your summary shouldn't be longer than a paragraph, especially if you're summarizing things within your body paragraphs, right? So kind of want to give a top down, and then in your body paragraphs, in the information part that we're talking about this week, you'll have more information, right? That goes more granular, right? It's kind of a hierarchy. Okay, so that was a quick one. We're under a half hour. That's great. So yeah, I will, after this, I'm going to go ahead and start getting started on next week so that can all be ready to launch. Again, I'll have my phone on me. I think for the forum, I'm going to have it like be a situation where you guys can help each other out on things. We're not going to do a quiz next week because we don't have reading. I am expecting you to probably reread a large chunk of ceremonies, as I was saying. But again, I'll have a structured activity for that. I'm kind of thinking on the quiz for this week, right? I introduced that line of thinking. Okay, other than that, y'all have a good one. We're almost done. We have like 2.5 weeks left, which is insane. But for those of you who have been sticking through this, I've been really impressed, and I'm really proud of y'all, and we're almost there. All right, so you have a good one, and I'll talk to you soon.